A letter, yellowed by time. On it, to Dad from Noah. A silver badge beside it, dulled by dust. One man, one lamp, no sound, just the weight of things unsaid. Then, a flash of red and blue. Boots on gravel. A knock. Mr. Hale, you're under arrest. Click. Cold steel closed around his wrists. He didn't flinch, didn't ask why. He just looked at the badge, then let it go. By morning, headlines would call him a threat. By noon, the internet would call him worse. No one cared about who he'd been, or what he'd lost. All they saw was a silent old man in handcuffs. But silence doesn't mean guilt. And not every man who walks away from war returns empty. Elkridge wasn't the kind of town that made the news. It didn't have skyscrapers, didn't host festivals, didn't produce famous sons. What it had was routine slow mornings, small talk at the diner, and the kind of silence that people called peace. Folks here believed in what they saw. A firm handshake meant honesty. A pressed shirt meant respect. And a man who kept to himself, well, that meant something was off. So when Jonas Hale moved into the rusted-out cabin at the edge of Walker's Hill, people noticed. Not because he made noise, he didn't. Not because he caused trouble, he never did. But because he didn't try to be seen. He bought groceries once a week. Always the same black coffee canned beans batteries. He paid in cash, never lingered. No smile, no small talk. Kids whispered stories about him. He talks to trees. I saw a scar on his neck looked like a bullet. He walks the woods at dawn like he's still hunting something. No one knocked on his door. No one asked if he was okay. And Jonas never gave them a reason to. He lived like a shadow that didn't want to stretch too far. But what no one in Elkridge knew, not the grocer, not the sheriff, not even the old woman who passed him every Sunday at church, was that Jonas once had a son. His name was Noah. He died in Kandahar 17 years ago. Noah was 22, sharp, kind, and stubborn in the same quiet way as his father. He volunteered. He wrote letters. He signed the final one, "Stay safe, old man. You taught me how." Jonas never wrote back. Not because he didn't care, but because by the time the letter arrived, Noah was already gone. That envelope, the one with his boy's final words, sat on the table every night. Unopened. Unread. Untouched. Because Jonas had learned long ago, opening wounds doesn't mean they'll heal. Sometimes they just bleed louder. Elkridge didn't know that story. They saw an old man in a worn coat and boots that had outlived their shine. They saw silence and filled it with suspicion. And in a town that trusted noise over nuance, a man like Jonas didn't stand a chance. To them, he was just a question they didn't want the answer to. So when the news came that Jonas Hale had been arrested for threatening a man at a gas station, no one blinked. They didn't ask why. They only nodded as if the story had finally caught up to the man they never tried to understand. But not all ghosts are meant to be feared. Some carry the weight of wars they never asked to fight. And some are still waiting for someone to remember who they really were. It started at a gas station. Nothing special, just a Tuesday. Just a broken fuel pump and a boy too loud for his own good. The kid couldn't have been more than 25 baseball cap backward music blaring from his car mouth, moving faster than his common sense. He was parked across two spots, phone in one hand, middle finger ready in the other. Jonas stood 2 pumps away filling a jerry can for his generator. He didn't say a word. Didn't even look the kid's way. But something about his stillness must have felt like judgment, because suddenly the kid was shouting. "You got a problem, old man, silence. I said you want to start something." Jonas turned his head slowly. No anger, no challenge, just a glance, flat, unreadable. And that was enough. "He threatened me." The kid yelled, backing away like he'd seen a ghost. He said he could drop me from 800 yards like a sniper or something. The clerk called the cops. The kid kept shouting. By the time 2 deputies arrived, the scene had already written itself. They asked Jonas for ID. He handed them a folded driver's license, clean and current. But when they asked more birthplace, employment, military record, he said nothing. "Sir, we need you to answer these questions." Jonas nodded, but didn't speak. Inside the station, the grainy security footage showed only fragments. The kid talking, gesturing. Jonas standing still, can in hand. No sound, no clear threat, but no denial either. That's all it took. They cuffed him quietly. He didn't resist, didn't protest, didn't explain. At the station, they ran his name through the usual databases. Nothing came up. No criminal record, no veteran benefits, no military history. To the system, Jonas Hale was a ghost. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Jonas had once served in a classified unit under Joint Special Operations. His file was sealed under Tier 1 clearance. Not even state authorities had access. And Jonas, he'd never applied for veteran status, never claimed a single benefit, never went to the VA. He didn't want a flag folded into a triangle. He just wanted silence. So when he was offered a public defender, he shrugged. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, he shook his head. When the young lawyer tried to talk to him in the holding cell, he just looked away. No priors, no records, no known employment, she told the judge at the arraignment. He refuses to speak. We don't know anything about him. The prosecutor leaned forward. We do. He scared a civilian. He made threats with military overtones. That's enough. The judge sighed. Set trial for next week. And just like that, a man who had once held the lives of 12 soldiers in his crosshairs, who had once moved through fire to save his own commander, was reduced to a name on a court docket and a file full of blanks. Nobody asked why he was quiet. Nobody wondered what made a man walk through hell and then choose to live as a shadow. They just saw what they wanted to see. An old man. A threat. A silence that must mean guilt. And Jonas, he just waited. Not for justice. Not for redemption. Just for it all to be over. By the next morning, the gas station's security footage had been clipped, filtered, and uploaded to social media. The video showed a young man yelling, backing away, pointing. Then it cut to an older man, silent, still, his face unreadable. No sound. No context. Just enough to feed a headline. Local veteran threatens civilian with military violence. Unstable ex-soldier makes sniper threat at pump number 6. Another reminder of why PTSD must be taken seriously. Within hours, it went viral. Comment sections turned into firing squads. This is why these guys shouldn't be walking free. Bet he's been waiting to snap for years. That man needs to be locked up before he really hurts someone. No one asked what had actually been said. No one wondered if anything had. It didn't matter. A few influencers picked it up for engagement. One even added dramatic music over the footage, with captions like, "He said he could take a life from 800 yards. Imagine hearing that at a gas station. The damage was done. By noon, Elk Ridge's mayor had called the courthouse. He wanted a swift and clear resolution, his words. The town couldn't afford bad press, especially with elections coming. He phrased it carefully, but the message was clear: make this go away. Fast. Reporters from nearby counties arrived parking vans across the street. They interviewed the gas station clerk. They talked to the kid's family. They knocked on neighbors' doors. But no one could say much about Jonas Hale. They didn't know him, didn't want to, so the media filled in the blanks. Reclusive, unstable, dangerous. They aired stock footage of war zones, flashed statistics about veteran aggression, even dug up unrelated cases from other states just to draw the line a little thicker. The courthouse became a stage. The townspeople an audience eager for a villain. Jonas had already been judged not by evidence, not by law, but by fear and clicks. And in a world where perception moves faster than truth, the story had already run ahead of the facts. All that was left was sentencing. Courtroom 2B of Elkridge County Courthouse was never meant for crowds. It had 12 pew-like benches, a squeaky ceiling fan, and a judge who preferred to finish her hearings before lunch. But that morning, the room was packed. Reporters filled the back row. Locals filled the rest, some out of curiosity, others out of quiet fury. They came to see the man whose silence had gone viral. The man the headlines called the Sniper Ghost. The man who never said a word. Jonas Hale sat at the defense table motionless. No tie, no suit, just the same faded shirt, the same boots that had walked miles of war and wilderness. His hands rested on the table. His eyes looked forward, but at nothing. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Jonas didn't move until the bailiff gently touched his arm. He stood as if it cost him something, then sat again like a man who had nothing left to spend. The prosecution opened first. Ladies and gentlemen, the young assistant DA began pacing slowly. You've all seen the video. You've heard the reports. You know what this is. He gestured toward Jonas like presenting a broken artifact. This is not about a man's service record. This is about the threat he made in a public place. A threat to use lethal military-grade violence. That kind of threat is not protected by medals or memories. He paused. Let the words hang. Let them settle like ash. War, he added, cannot be an excuse to scare civilians. It is not a shield. And it cannot be allowed to silence justice. A few jurors nodded. Others just looked tired. Then came the defense. Jonas's public defender was young, barely out of law school. She stood, shuffled a few papers, then cleared her throat. My client has chosen not to speak. He has not provided a statement. But he has cooperated with every order. He has shown no aggression. There is no weapon, no contact, no injury. She glanced at Jonas. He didn't look back. She continued softer. Now I ask the jury to consider the facts, not the headlines, not the speculation, just the facts. She sat down. And with that, the defense rested. No witnesses, no character testimonies, no family, just silence. The judge called a recess before deliberation. In the hallway, the mood was more theater than justice. People whispered. Some scrolled through their phones, refreshing live blogs. A reporter muttered, "This one's already written." And she wasn't wrong. Because in a courtroom where nothing had really been said, everyone already believed they knew the story. Jonas Hale had given them no reason to think otherwise. No plea, no outburst, no confession. He just sat there, like a man who had already accepted whatever came next. To most, it looked like guilt. To a few, maybe grief. But to Jonas, it was something older, deeper. He wasn't resisting. He was remembering. And no one, not the jury, not the judge, not the prosecutor, could see that the silence they feared was the only thing keeping everything else from coming out. 3 counties over, in a faded living room lined with medals and dust, Raymond Price sat in his recliner watching the trial coverage on a blurry local news feed. He wasn't paying much attention until he heard the name. Jonas Hale. He sat up straighter. Not many names still made his spine react like that. But this one was carved into his memory. He'd heard it last in Kandahar on a crackling radio just minutes before everything went to hell. Raymond didn't waste time. He grabbed his phone and called the only person who might still have the number. Helen. Helen Briggs was a widow now. She had been ever since her husband, Corporal Tom Briggs, never came back from that same mission. The one Jonas Hale had survived. She picked up after one ring. "I know it's been years," Raymond said. "But Jonas, he's in trouble." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet exhale. "I'll call him," she said. She didn't need to ask who. Far north, in a cabin so deep in the woods it didn't show on maps, a phone rang. Mason Cole let it buzz twice before answering. He hadn't spoken to Helen in over a decade, but her voice hadn't changed. "Mason," she said. "It's Jonas." He didn't ask what happened, didn't need details, just closed his eyes and listened. A pause. Then, "He's being prosecuted. No one knows who he is." Mason stood, walked to the small cabinet beside the fireplace, opened it. Inside a uniform pressed and folded, a silver rank badge, and a photograph. 12 men, all smiling, one of them, Jonas, younger, tired, alive. He hadn't worn that uniform in years, but now. He took it out, brushed it off, buttoned each layer like a ritual. Then he reached for the badge, clipped it to his collar, straightened his shoulders, took one last look at the photo. "If the world forgets who he is," he whispered, "I'll be the one to remind them." And with that, the retired General Mason Cole stepped into his boots one more time. Not for war, not for glory, but for a man who never asked to be remembered, and was now being punished for being forgotten. The courtroom was settling into its final breaths. The judge had given her instructions. The jury was preparing to leave for deliberation. Everyone assumed the story had been told. Jonas sat, as he always had, still silent, staring straight ahead. If he felt anything, he buried it beneath decades of discipline. Then the doors at the back of the room opened, not with a bang, not with drama, just a quiet creak, and the sound of polished boots on tile. Heads turned. A few people stood instinctively unsure why. The man who entered wore a dark, formal uniform. His collar carried 4 silver stars. His posture cut through the room like a blade. He didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the cameras, just walked forward step by steady step, until he stood before the judge's bench. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm but commanding. "My name is Mason Cole, retired General United States Army. I request permission to address this court as a character witness." The judge blinked. The bailiff had already moved toward him, unsure whether to intervene, but the courtroom clerk whispered something confirmation of identity. The judge nodded. "Granted." Cole turned, not to the jury, not to the crowd, but to Jonas. He walked slowly toward the defense table. The cameras followed. The air thickened. When he reached Jonas, he didn't speak. He just reached up, unclipped the silver badge from his collar, and placed it gently on the table in front of him. The metal made a soft sound as it touched the wood. That sound somehow was louder than any argument spoken all morning. The room froze. Reporters lowered their cameras. The prosecutor sat back in his chair. One juror covered her mouth. Jonas didn't look at the badge, didn't look at Mason. But his eyes shifted just slightly, like the ripple of wind through a frozen lake. Cole turned to the judge once more. "I won't take long," he said. "But before you pass judgment on that man, you should hear who he really is." And in that instant, the story stopped being about fear and started being about truth. General Mason Cole took a step forward, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't need notes, didn't clear his throat. He just spoke as if the words had been waiting 17 years. Kandahar, 2004. The name alone shifted the air. We were caught in an ambush. No comms, no air support. 12 of us pinned behind a crumbled wall surrounded on all sides. He paused. I was hit in the leg. 2 of my men were bleeding out. And I knew we wouldn't last another 5 minutes. He looked at Jonas, then back to the courtroom. But then something changed. The bullets stopped landing so close. Then they stopped landing at all. Another pause, because someone from somewhere we couldn't see was picking off the enemy. One by one. Clean. Precise. Then he moves. Not away. Toward the fight. Like God had handed someone the trigger and whispered, "Now." Dust. Gunfire. Chaos. Through the haze, a pair of steady hands adjust the scope. A bead of sweat runs down a brow already bloodied. Breath in. Hold. One shot clean. Jonas Hale lies prone in the dirt, face streaked with ash, eyes locked on the chaos below. He doesn't blink, doesn't speak, just squeezes the trigger again. 12 confirmed kills. 5 minutes. The last one, 936 yards. Moving target. Crosswind. Then he moves. Not away. Toward the fight. He finds Cole, drags him by the vest, throws him into a half-buried supply pit, presses gauze to the wound. No words. Just survival. Cole's voice trembled just slightly. Jonas Hale was that sniper. He let it sit. Let the truth breathe. I never saw his face that day. Not until weeks later. He never told the story. Never stood on a podium. Never even took the commendation. A long silence. He didn't threaten anyone at that gas station. He didn't need to. Because men like him don't bluff. Cole turned slowly, sweeping the jury with his gaze. Do you know how much restraint it takes for a man trained to end life from a mile away, to walk through a world that fears him, and say nothing? He pointed to Jonas. That man saved lives. He carried the cost alone. And he never asked for anything in return. Not medals, not praise. Certainly not this. Cole stepped back. He's not dangerous. He's disciplined. He's not unstable. He's unfinished. Then softer. He's not the ghost. He's the reason some of us are still here. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence born from order, but the kind born from something deeper. Respect. Reckoning. The judge sat back, eyes glistening, gavel in hand. Her voice, when it came, was no longer firm, but full. In light of new testimony and critical context, she said, "This court hereby dismisses all charges against Mr. Jonas Hale, effective immediately." She struck the gavel. Not hard, not angry, just final. The bailiff walked over slowly. He was younger, maybe 30. Probably hadn't served. But his hands moved carefully now. He knelt slightly to remove the cuffs. Didn't yank. Didn't rush. Jonas lifted his wrists. The steel fell away with a soft clink. The sound of judgment being undone. He stood. His legs moved stiff but steady. He didn't look at the judge. Didn't scan the crowd. Didn't seek applause. He just turned. Took 3 steps. And stood before Mason Cole. For the first time since the trial began, Jonas moved with purpose. He reached out, gripped Cole's hand, held it. And then finally, he spoke. A whisper, but it carried. Noah would have done the same. Cole's eyes closed for half a second, and that was enough. Just the quiet hum of a courtroom that had forgotten how to breathe. Now exhaling all at once. Jonas walked out of the courthouse alone. No cameras chased him. No reporters shouted his name. They just watched quiet, unsure of what to say to a man who had just reminded them all what dignity looked like. Outside, the sky was overcast, the wind mild, but the moment stood still. Lining the courthouse steps were a dozen men and women older, worn some in uniform, some in plain clothes. Capped heads, straight backs, veterans. They didn't speak. They didn't move. As Jonas passed, they saluted, one by one, in perfect silence. He didn't return the gesture. He didn't need to. Because the message had already passed between them, a language built not of words, but of wars survived, and wounds remembered. Later that evening, a woman, hair-white sweater patched at the elbow, walked slowly up the dirt path to Jonas's cabin. She didn't knock, didn't stay. She just placed a single bouquet wildflowers hand-tied on the step, then turned and left. No note, no name, just presence. The next day, a local paper quietly ran a headline above the fold, "Elk Ridge's Ghost Soldier, the Man We Failed to See." Elsewhere, in a dark room lit only by a phone screen, a young man scrolled through his social feed. He found the video, the one that had gone viral. He hovered over the comment section, thumb trembling. Then he deleted it. One morning, the same kid from the gas station came alone. Hands in his pockets, steps unsure. He walked up to the cabin slow, like the ground itself was judging him. He raised his hand to knock, but stopped. For a moment, he just stood there. Like maybe he thought a knock wouldn't be enough. Or maybe he knew it was already too late. He lowered his hand, took a breath, and walked away. No words, no apology. Just silence, the only kind Jonas would have understood. Sometimes justice comes late. But if it arrives carrying the truth, it still counts. Because there are people who never needed to be forgiven. They just needed to be remembered correctly.